Welcome back. This is Professor Serrano-Correa, and this is Lesson 2.9, Controls in Action. In this lesson, we will look at the button, the switch, the slider, and the text field, and learn how to execute code within these. We're going to create some actions. And we did this for a button and a text field in lesson 1.8. So we're going to review that because your book does not, it doesn't review how to do it, the exact steps. So you would have to go back and look at that lesson. So we'll go through here and review exactly how to add actions and edit them, and then go through the everything that your lesson goes through. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create our project, new Xcode project. Remember, it's a single view app, and if you don't see single view app, it's because you haven't chosen iOS, so single view app. And then it tells you to name it Common Input Controllers or Controls. Very tiny, difficult to see. Okay. I always add my projects to a project folder. Remember, when you send projects to me, send me the whole project folder. Otherwise I can't run your project. Okay, so create, and don't forget those screenshots are really helpful too. Okay. So we want to click on main storyboard, and then for this we want to get rid of this window, because what we want to look at is the assistant editor. And so when you click on the assistant editor, it shows it to the right of your view controller. If your view controller hides, like it did mine, I just click it up here and it comes back. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and add, the first thing that it wants me to add is a button from my object library. So my object library is up here. Remember, for version 10, and it's in the properties. It's down here under the properties, our inspector window, in versions 9 and below. Okay, so I type button in my search, and I drag and I drop my button wherever I want it. I think I'm going to move it a little bit. Okay, so there's my button. As you add all these different objects, your book tells you to play with the properties and the attributes. Sorry, I keep calling them properties and as attributes. It's properties in other languages. So just know properties and attributes is the same thing. I'm used to saying properties. So you can change the attributes of your button, and just change one attribute at a time and run it so you can see what changes with your object. It's the best way to do it. I'm just going to leave them plain so we can get this done quickly. So we have our button. Here we have our view controller Swift file. This is where we add our actions, if you remember. And if you remember, to add an action, first of all, actions are always added under the view did load. They're always down here. And I'll show you why in just towards the end. I'll show you the difference between adding something here versus above. So right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to press control, the control button. I'm going to select my object, and then I'm going to drag and insert my action. Notice it says action here. Actually, I'll show you right now the difference. So if I press control and I drag and drop at the top before view did load, it adds an outlet. So outlets go before view did load. I mean, I could change it to an action, but outlets are just if you're actually coding for a company, you would always put your outlets at the above and your actions at the bottom. And we'll review outlets also. We used them in 1.8, but we'll review them in a minute. So, okay, so I'm going to go here, add my action. The object is called view controller. The name is going to be the name of my button. And your book says to name it, let's see, button tapped. Now, we're going to look at the type, what this means in just a second. I'm going to leave it at any. And the event is called touch up inside. So these are the different events that can happen for a button. So we have did end on exit, editing changed, touch down, touch canceled. So we're just going to leave it at touch up inside. I believe that's what it said. Let's just take a look. Yep. It says the default is touch up inside, but you can also use the primary action triggered control event, which will be triggered at the same time as touch up inside. If you want to execute in response to a different control, you can choose from this pop-up that I just showed you. Remember that when you create an IB action, the function is passed to the sender as a parameter. The sender refers to the specific control that triggers the action. So this is what I want to show you here. So if I want to go ahead and connect this, what it's saying here is the sender is any. It can be anything that sends something to me, but I just want the sender to be UI button. And the reason I want that is that if I type sender dot here, it doesn't give me anything because it doesn't know what object is passing. So I would have to just I would have to know exactly the method that goes with sender. But if I change any to UI button, then when I type sender, then it says, okay, you want a some method that goes with the UI button class. And so your book says, and we're actually not using sender for this one. What we're going to do is we're just going to print the button was tapped. Okay, and then when we run, we're going to see button was tapped in the console area. I'm going to move this over a little bit here. Okay, I'm going to tap the button, and then down here in the console it says button was tapped. Every time I tap it, it goes to here and it executes this code. So you can imagine there's all kinds of stuff you can do here, right? And that's what we're going to learn, all the different coding that we can do when we either press a button or do some kind of action in some object. So let's quit our simulator, stop our program. Okay, the next thing, let's see, make sure I don't miss anything here. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a switch. And so again, we're going to go to our object library. I'm going to type switch. I'm going to drag and drop my switch here. And then I'm going to add again an action. Actions go here. And when I add this action, let's see what they called it. They called it switch toggled. And instead of leaving my sender to any, I'm going to change it to UI switch so I don't have to type it myself. And the event is going to be on value change. So basically it's saying, okay, if the value changes from on to off, then trigger this event, this action. And then what your book has you do is it has you print an if statement, and it says if sender, again, sender is what? Sender is UI switch. That's my sender. So these are all the methods and properties that I can use for sender. And so I'm going to use is on. I'm going to say if sender is on is then print I'm just following your book, the switch is on. And then else the switch is off. Okay, and I forgot. All right, so I have my quotes because it's a string. This is a print. It's an if-else statement. So if this is true, it will print switches on here on the console. So I'm going to test it. Right now it's on. I'm going to click on it. It says the switch is off. Click on it. The switch is on. I can click my button. Button was tapped. Okay, so everything's working. I'm going to quit the simulator. It's kind of bothering me. There we go. Okay, and the next thing we're going to look at is a slider. So we'll go to the object library. We're going to type slider. We're going to drag and drop our slider. And go. Now it's centered. And again, we're going to add, I press Control and I hold down my object and I drag. Don't do that. Press Control, drag, and drop where you want your action. This one is going to be called, let's see, slider value changed. Slider value changed. I'm going to go ahead and change it to UI slider. And we'll leave it at value changed. But these are your the different action events. And we're going to connect it. And then what we're going to do for this is we would like to see the value of our slider. So remember, if you take the slider and you go to the left, it's going to decrease all the way to 0. If you go to the right, it's going to increase all the way to 1. So we want to see that. So we're going to print sender dot, sender is UI slider, and it's called value. Okay, so when I run it, right, so right now, if I click on it, it tells me the value of where the slider is, and then if I slide it down, it's going to go down all the way to 0, and it's going to slide all the way up to 1. Again, I can click this on and off, and it says switch off, switch on, button was tapped. Okay. Let's see, what else do we have on here? The next one that it wants us to add is a text box. Or a text, yeah. Okay, so we're going to add a text box, and if you're ever here to get back to where you were, remember to click on Show the Project Navigator, and then go to whatever file you want to go to. And so now I'm going to add make sure you always have your view controller clicked. That way you can see your object library. Okay, so I'm going to attach text field. I'm going to add my text box. Maybe like right there. And for the text box, it also wants us to add an action. It actually wants us to add 2 actions. One action is we type a text and we press enter, and we get to see what was entered. The second action it wants us to add is so that we can see the text as it's being typed. Okay, so control, sorry about that, drag, and then action, view controller, the name, the first one's going to be keyboard, return key tapped, and UI text field. So on the first one, it's going to be editing did end. And let me just double check that's what they want you to do here. It says add a label. Set the label's text to the current text in the text field when the user taps the enter or done key on the keyboard. We're going to use the IB action using the primary action triggered event from the text field to view controller.swift. Okay, so we're actually going to change this to primary action triggered, and then it says use a descriptive name, which we did. We called it keyboard returned key tapped, and set the sender's type to UI text field. We change the type to UI text field, and then we connect. And then what it wants us to do is just print out whatever it is that was typed. So we're going to print text. And well, actually, before we do that, we have to, So to be able to print the text, you actually have to okay, let's try this. Print sender.text. Let's see if that works. Expression implicit coerced from string. Okay, so let's not do that. Let's assign it to a constant. So we'll say if we'll create a constant called text, and we'll assign it sender.text. And then we'll print text. All right. Let's see if that works. Okay, so we're going to type the word Joe and press enter. And notice here at the bottom it says Joe. Now notice if I delete the E, the O, and the J, it doesn't show anything down here. If I type Mary and then press enter, it shows Mary. Okay, so this one it waits until I either hit done or I press enter to then execute whatever's inside here. So the action is it's waiting for me to do one of those things. So the other thing that we want to look at is how can we look as the person is changing the values. So let's quit the simulator, stop our program. And I'm going to add another action. This time we're going to add that right there. Action. This one's going to be called text changed. So as the text changes, I want to see it. And we're going to call you a text field. So here we have editing changed. And it says, using the assistant editor, add an IB action using the editing changed control event. So we'll change editing changed, and all this stays the same, and we connect. So we're going to do the same thing. I'm just going to copy the text. And paste it. And run the program. So every time it changes, it's gonna print the text. Okay, so if I type the J, notice here at the bottom it says, in the console it says J O E. So every time it prints what I'm typing. Also, if I delete the E, types Joe. If I delete the J, it outputs J. And then if I type Mary, I see M. Also, notice that it grabbed the empty text. So there was empty text on here also shown. So if I delete all this, and then I type in J, there's an empty text or string right here. Okay, so we're going to stop that, quit the simulator, and let's see where we're at. We did the switches, we did the sliders, text field. Okay, it says you can create outlets that allow actions to access properties on your views and controls, even if the view or control isn't the sender. Okay, so this is where, let's say that you're in the text, in your text field, and you want to find out if the button was tapped. Or in this case, what they're doing is if they tap the button, they want to check to see if the switch is on or off. Okay, so this is where you're in one object and you want to find out what's going on in another object. How do you do that? And the way we do that, if you remember, is that we have to create an outlet. And the outlets are created just like you create actions. You're going to drag and drop, and you're going to do it above the view did load. So it wants us to create an outlet for the switch and the slider. So we're going to click on that. We're going to hold control. We're going to, first of all, so this is where I want to add it. Right there. Control, drop. It's an outlet. And I'm going to name it, this is my switch. Now I'm not going to name it switch because switch is a reserved word, so it won't let you use it. You can name it my switch. They named it in the book, they named it toggle, so I'll go ahead and name it that so it's not confusing. The type is UI switch, and we connect. I'm going to do the same thing with the slider. Right there. And this one's called slider. It's an outlet. Okay, so I've got 2 outlets. And then what I want to do is, go to my button, and I'm going to go to the button right there. So button was tapped. And then I want to check to see I want to check if the button is on. If it's on, I want to say the switch is on, else the switch is off. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy this code just to save myself some time. And when I copy it, I just need to change one thing. This is no longer sender. I don't want it. I'm not talking about sender. I'm not talking about the button. I want to talk about the toggle, the switch. And so remember that we created this variable here called toggle, and so that's what I'll type on there. I'll type in toggle, and then now it's referencing to this inside. So if I tap on my button, it's going to look to see if this is on or off. Okay. So I click on the button, and it says the button was tapped. That's this line right here. And then it says if toggle dot is on, it is on. So it's going to print the switch is on, and it does, the switch is on. Then I can turn it off. Remember, if I turn it off, it's going to go to this action function, and it's going to say that I've turned it off. If I click on the button again, it's going to go to this function, button tapped, and it's going to tell me the button was tapped and the switch is off. Okay, and I do all that by just using my variable that I've created in my view controller. Okay. I am working on my iPad and trying to show you guys this on here, so it takes a second to switch back and forth. Okay, so we did that there. Then it goes into gesture recognizers, how it recognizes gestures. So, for example, you have things like tapping. So let's say we have a button or a slider or even your switch, right? In your switch, you can tap the switch or you can swipe. A lot of people will hold it and move it and swipe. Well, hold and move is different. Actually, it's swiping it, just like tapping it quickly and moving it to the right or left. So you have all these gesture recognizers here, and you can actually test these out if you have a touch screen. If you don't have a touch screen, you won't be able to test them out. I do not have a touch screen. Well, actually, let's try it out with, this is a new Mac. I wonder, I haven't tried it out. Okay, let's, let me quit my simulator. And okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go to our object library and we're going to type gesture. And these are the different gesture recognizers. I'm just going to grab the first one, which is the one that it wanted us to grab. And then we dragged it to the view controller. If we go over here to the right hand side and we look at the properties, so if you look at the top here of your view controller, you have a gesture recognizer. If you click on it and then click here, you'll see the attributes of, or the properties of your gesture recognizer. It says that it's going to recognize one tap or one touch, and okay. Then it says using the assistant editor and an IB action from the recognizer to the view controller Swift, use a descriptive name such as respond to tap gesture and set the sender type to UI tap gesture recognizer. So now we're using the assistant editor. We're going to add an IB action from our recognizer to the view controller. So remember, the recognizer is at the top. Okay, so I'm going to close this so I have more room. Here is my object, and again I'm going to take this, and it doesn't matter where I add it here. I'm just going to keep it at the top after view load right there. Okay. It says, and this is the part that gets difficult when you're following the book, is following all the instructions. So I've added the first part. Using the assistant editor, I've added the IB action to my view controller Swift. Use a descriptive name, and it tells me to call it respond to tap gesture. Respond to tap gesture. And set the sender type. Okay, so the sender type is that. The following implementation of respond to tap gesture will determine whether the user tapped when the recognizer's action was called, and it's going to print out the X and Y value to the console. Okay. Go ahead and connect. And then they give you the code. So I'm just typing the code that they give me here, right there. It says let location equal sender.location in view and then print location. So type of that, yeah, print location. Well, there was a warning, but it went away. Don't know what it said. Okay, so we have let location, and she'll send our location, and it will print our location. And we're going to build and run the application that we're going to try tapping on the screen, and the coordinates of your tap will be printed. So right now we're just tapping anywhere on the screen, and it's going to say, notice how the action does not trigger when you interact with the other controls on the screen because the gesture is only tied to the view controller's view. So if I tap on the text box, the button, the switch, or my slider, nothing's going to happen. It's only if I tap in the areas that don't have one of those objects. Okay. Okay. This came up on my computer. Let me see what this is. I'm still trying to figure out how to use my new Mac, so give me a second. Okay, that wasn't it. Yeah, I can't. I'm not sure how to. It's not a touch screen. It has a touch little bar at the top, and I don't know that I can actually see what this is. No idea. Okay, so you can play that. You can play with that at home. Hopefully it will work for you. And if you have a touch screen, you should be able to tap anywhere on the white area, but not on these objects. It should not show you any values down here on the console. Okay, the next section in your book, it talks about how do we program actions ourselves without actually using interface builder connectors. So this is something that you don't have to do, but you want to understand just so that you know how it works. So we're looking at this page here, and it says the first thing that we want to do is we want to disconnect. So it says to demonstrate connecting a control. So we're going to connect a control, actually programming it ourselves. So we're going to disconnect the existing button from the button tapped action, and we're going to reconnect the two in code. We're going to highlight the button. Oh, this is how to do it. Highlight the button in your storyboard, then open the Connections Inspector. Connections Inspector is something you probably haven't used. So you highlight the button. Notice up here, this is so this is Assistant Editor. You've got Version Editor, Standard Editor. And then, wait, now I forgot what I was doing. Okay, what am I doing? Hold on. So, oh yeah, the Connection Inspector. Okay, sorry. All right, so this is the inspector window, right? So this is where you looked at your, if we click on the button, this is the attributes inspector. This is your size inspector. This is your connection inspector. So that's the one you want to click on. And then if you look on here, it says that the button has an editing changed event, and you have an action for that, and you have an action for this. So it's wanting us to delete one of these. Let me check which one again. It wants us to delete the one that says touch up inside. Okay, I must have not done that one. Well, that's okay. We'll just change. I'm not sure what I did. We'll change this one that says primary action triggered. And then to disconnect these, you just click on the little X right there. Sorry about that. I didn't read exactly what your book said, and it wanted you to create a touch up inside. Let me see. Let me just double check. Yeah, for the button. And I'm not in the button. That's why. Sorry. Here's the button. There's the touch up inside. Okay, now I can disconnect this one, and then we're going to create an outlet for our button so that we can actually do this programmatically. So we'll go back and create an outlet. So here's the button, and we'll drag it and create an outlet up here. And we're just going to call it button and connect. Okay, and then we're going to follow the book, and we're just going to add the code that it says. The code is going to be added here where it says view did load. So it says the best place to connect the button to the action is right after the view has finished loading. So the action is still here. You have button tapped, so that's still there. Okay, and we just have to connect. We want it to connect to button tapped, and it says the best place to do this is in view did load, the very end of view did load. And we're going to add this code right here. So let's add it first, and then let's look at it step by step. So where's our view did load here? And then we'll add button dot add target self action selector. Button tabbed is the button tab has to be the same. Whatever name you used here is the name that you're going to use here. So make sure that you've spelled it the same that you spelled it here, or called it the same thing, otherwise it's not going to work. Open parentheses. Remember that when you add it open parentheses, it automatically adds your close parentheses. So right now looks like I've added one too many parentheses. And then we're going to have comma, and then 4, touch up inside. Okay. Let's see what I did. Button dot add target, and then self action selector button tapped Oh, I misspelled inside. Inside. There we go. All right. So let's take a look at this before we run it. The add target, so this right here, the add target, so button is this variable, add target, and then action 4 method will connect the control to a particular action, and it requires 3 arguments. So when you do add target, it requires the self argument. Here, let me just go through exactly as your book specifies it. So you have 3 arguments that it requires. The first argument is the owner of the function you want to execute. The owner of the button tapped is self. The second argument is a selector, the name used to select a method to execute for an object. Swift uses selector as a syntax to locate a particular method. The last argument is the event that should trigger the action. Just like you saw earlier in the connections inspector, you should tie your action to touch up inside. And so when I tap the button, I'm going to tie it to this action, or the button tap will be tied to this action. So the action is touching the button. When that happens, when that event happens, it calls this action function. If that makes sense. Okay, so let's build and run it. And so let's say that, let's try it out. So this is the button. If I click the button, what it should do is it should say button was tapped and then tell me if it's the toggle is on or off. So it says button was tapped, the switch is on. Switch is off, button was tapped, switch is off. Okay. So here, let's say that it was switch toggle, right? So let's say that you created, here's a variable toggle. So we would say toggle.addTarget self action selector. Here we would change it to switch toggled 4, and then whatever event you use for switch toggle, whatever you used here. And remember that, let me quit here. When you add, let's say that we're back here and I add a connector to this. So whatever this is here is the event. So for the switch, the event is value changed, but it could be any of these events. So it depends on what you set it to or what you want it to be. So if you put on here primary action triggered, then that's what it will do. It's just whatever you decide that you want the event to be. So you're programming it here. You're saying, so instead of choosing it from this list, you're putting it here and telling it which one. And yeah, that's about it. Okay, so that's the end of this lesson. Let's take a look at your lab. have a look at your lab. So let's see what it says. It says the object of this lab is to create and compile an application with 2 buttons that when tapped change the contents of a label. Okay, create a new project called 2 buttons using a single view application and set the device family to iPhone. Okay. Okay, so just follow the instructions on here. Let me know if you have any questions. It looks like a pretty simple lab. We actually did in 1.8, we actually took some, I think we took some text and we typed it and pressed a button and copied it to a label or something, displayed it to a label. So if you have questions, you can go back to that lesson and take a look at it. Thank you.